Welcome to the second edition of our three-part webinar series exploring Japan's best kept secrets. This time we'll be taking a deep dive into the world of Japanese crafts. I'm Aki Nakanishi. I'm the director of Japan Institute, and Arlene Schnitzer, curator of culture, art, and education at Poland Japanese Garden. I know it's a mouthful of a title, but it is what it is. Right off the bat, I just want to say thank you so much for tuning in to spend your Friday with us as we unpack the ethos and mastery of Japanese crafts led by our friend Steve Beimel of Japan Crafts 21. And as was the case last month, I'm actually speaking to you live from England, having just come down from Cambridge to London. So I'm actually sitting here in my hotel room, just setting myself up to give a quick overview of this program before turning this over to Steve, who's sitting literally on the other side of the planet, actually. And I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir when I say that Japanese crafts are a testament to centuries of tradition, meticulous attention to detail, and a deep-rooted respect for nature and heritage. From the art of kintsugi exhibition, which we are actually having and hosting at the garden right now, is the practice of mending broken ceramics with gold and to celebrate imperfection, actually, all the way to the precision of hand-woven kimono textiles and the elegance of handcrafted ceramics like bizen and kutani. These crafts actually embody what is an integral part of the evolution of the Japanese garden, where these different art forms most organically come together. And what truly captivates the world is not only the skills involved here, but the stories embedded in every item. You know, the stories of generational knowledge passed down from generation to generation, unwavering dedication to mastery, and a harmonious blend of function and artistry. The Japanese crafts inspire because they go beyond mere aesthetics. They connect people to culture, mindfulness, and a timeless appreciation for the art of making. And with our partnership, Poland Japanese Gardens partnership with Japan Crafts 21, and through these webinars, we are hoping to offer bite-sized yet substantive facets of what you may have come across by way of Japanese culture and traditions in the past. So I hope you are just as excited and as eager about this whole thing as I am. And just as much as I'd like to get this rolling, I want to share just a couple of housekeeping notes, actually. First is that we will have time for Q&A towards the end of the program. So you can either ask questions then, or you are welcome to use the Q&A box at the very bottom of this screen to post your question as we go along. The second is that we will be recording this video for later sharing and viewing upon Poland Japanese Garden's official YouTube channel in a couple of weeks' time. So it'd be especially useful if you'd like to share the video with anyone or go back in the program to revisit any specific parts of it. So with that, I'd like to get this underway by presenting one of the most revered Western aficionados of Japanese culture and traditional craftsmanship. I give you Mr. Steve Beimel. Steve, take it away.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for inviting me to speak to your membership. It's a great pleasure. Going to go right into sharing my screen here. So we are Japan Craft 21, and our mission is to revitalize crafts in Japan for the 21st century. And why we chose Japan? Well, if you look at the scale here, you could easily say that on the right side of the scale, if you would place all of the master crafts passed down for centuries and centuries, honed and refined, taking craftspeople 7, 8, 9, 10 years to master. On one side, Japan would most likely have more than most of the world combined. Unfortunately, if we look at this chart, in 1979, there were 300,000 such master craftspeople in Japan. And by 2028, we estimate there'll be about 20,000 left. This is a 92% drop in the world's powerhouse of craftsmanship. And it's something that we could not live without at least making an effort. So we started an organization, and our mission is to identify problems, to create strategies, and to take actions. For example, we created 4 levels of definition for crafts so that all crafts can be, let's say, respected, and especially we can make a distinction between masters and hobbyists. So people like George Nakashima, who spent a lifetime making this extraordinary furniture, one of a kind or limited editions, he would be a master artist craftsman. Master artisan craftsmen would be people who have the same methodology, the same training, the same focus, but they can produce many of the same kind, not one of a kind, but in multiple numbers, bringing the cost way down to make it more affordable for the average person. Then we have what we call crafts. And crafts are in every culture. They don't depend on centuries of tradition. Yet they're good, they're decent, they're practical, they're inexpensive, and they're part of our culture, and we want to honor that. Finally, we have hobby crafts, which we all know, things that we can go to a class on a weekend and master. And these are wonderful things to have. So we have all 4 levels. Each one is respected for what it is. But it's important that the word craft is defined for the world. We focus on master artisan crafts because this is where we see the greatest evaporation, almost you could say, of craftspeople. Master artists have gallery systems behind them, and they're doing pretty well. So again, we find problems, we create strategies, and then we put them into action. The problem was we wanted to encourage building of traditional residential buildings in Kyoto again. But the problem was there were no young carpenters that could do joinery anymore. Young carpenters were not taught how to do age-old Japanese nailless construction. So we started a school, and so far we've trained 12 young working carpenters in joinery. And this is completely free of charge, and it's held on Sundays so they can attend without interfering with their work. We did the same thing with plasterers, so that young plasterers who are no longer taught how to make mud walls, we have now 5 graduates in that course, and we are continuing our process in the future. The traditions, the extraordinary body of work in Kyoto's Nishijin district is almost gone, which is a very difficult thing for people to say. It's tragic. So we have identified 10, 70, 80, and 90-year-old master dyers, people who they're the only ones left who can do certain techniques. And we are training them. Excuse me, we have created a training program where they train 4 apprentices, and we pay the living expenses of the apprentices so that we can pass these great methods down to the future generations. The Japanese crafts are really, Japanese master crafts, artist crafts, artisan crafts are really not known to the world. It's a big secret. So we have created a social media program where we are exposing the world to these master works. We have programs similar to the one we are doing today, where we explain, we give overviews, we give introductions to many aspects of Japanese culture to the world. One of the problems was there are too many problems in the craft world. There are so many problems that we didn't know where to begin. So we started a contest series choosing extraordinary young craftspeople with great skill, passion, and talent, who would then in turn tell us what needs to be done. So we have now 36 winners so far in our contest, and it's continuing on to this day. So today's program, we're going to be covering 12 crafts, and I can say that this is the greatest example of the tip of the iceberg that I could possibly imagine. We're just going to be seeing a little bit of 12 genres of craftsmanship in Japan. And each one of these could easily be several one-hour presentations. We're beginning with ceramics, and I chose these 5 genres of ceramics. There are many, many other genres in Japan, but I chose 5. I chose Celadon because of the obsession for perfection, Raku for the fascination with imperfection, Hagi because of its warmth and naturalness of the folk form, Shigaraki ware, the power of nature, pure fire and pure clay, and then Kutani ware, which is creativity in a decorative form. So starting with Celadon, I ask you, when I say Celadon, what color comes to mind? This is a graph of all the different colors which are considered Celadon. There are actually 30 different shades, everywhere from an off-white to a blue. And this is achieved by, for example, the greens can be altered or increased by manipulating the amount of iron in the glaze. If you have less iron, it becomes blue. This is all also combined with well-timed reduction of oxygen in the kiln. So Celadon came fairly late to Japan. It's just about 400 years ago. It was in China 1,000 years ago, in Korea shortly thereafter. So Japanese were creating these Chinese influence pieces in the 1600s, and they're still producing them today. Celadon is the holy grail of ceramics. It's not unusual for an artist to lose 80% of their firing just because of the imperfections which appear through the firing process. Celadon must be perfect. And here we have a piece done by a contemporary ceramic artist. It's a very, very modern sensibility. The work of the great Kawase Shinobu. He's the king of Celadon in many ways. His work is very poetic. You notice there are no crackles in the surface of the Celadon here, but here we have a work that has crackles in it, and crackles are achieved by manipulating the timing of the cooling of the kiln after firing. The clay body and the glaze cool at different rates. So if you speed up the cooling of the firing, crackles will appear. If you make it very slow, then you will have a crackle-free surface. And this depends on what the artist wants to achieve. Here's the work of the great Fukami Sueharu. He actually had an exhibition in Portland a number of years ago. He's one of the greatest ceramic artists in the world. His works are in the Metropolitan New York and in museums all over the world. This is a very light piece. It's hollow. It's about a meter wide. And his forte is this exquisite gradation of color, how the blue goes from light to dark in the most beautiful blurring effect. Rakuware is the opposite of Celadon in that it is imperfect. This was brought about by the great tea master Sen no Rikyu. In the late 1500s, he had a group of students numbering about 3,000 people in the highest level of the samurai society. And he was the ruling aesthete of the time. He took the Japanese aesthetic, the aesthetic of what Japanese were looking for up until that time. They were enamored with perfect Chinese ceramics, and he created the Raku bowl, which is totally on the, I would say, the opposite end of an extreme. The rakubo is lumpy, it's drippy, it's asymmetrical, yet you can feel where the fingers of the potter laid upon the piece when it was being made. It's a very personal, it's a very intimate piece. And unlike Celadon, which is pretty much static, Rakuware will become more beautiful each time you look at it. It'll become deeper and deeper in your consciousness. So this is done by the first Raku family and first Raku member of the family. 15 generations later, Jikinyu the 15th is making in the 21st century the Rakuware like this. Hagiware is another form of ceramics which was brought forward and inspired by Sen no Rikyu. Originally, Rikyu fell in love with the folk pottery of Korea. These were works like this were inexpensive rice bowls made for peasants, and it's it's very warm. It's very, let's say, there's a spontaneity to it, and he took this concept and he brought it to the highest level of Japanese society at the time, which was the tea room. And this gave birth to Hagi. And Hagi is a kiln that's been functioning for 400 years in Japan, founded by Korean potters. Hagi is known for its warmth, its softness. The work of Kaneta Masanao, he is a sculptor. He's an 8th generation Hagi potter. And he's a sculptor. He actually scoops out the clay. He does not use a wheel. He scoops it out and sculpts it like a piece of sculpture. He gets the pink by reducing the amount by increasing the amount of oxygen in the kiln at a certain time of the firing. Yakushime is another form which was inspired by Sen no Rikyu. Works like this were in Japan for at least 800 or 900 years, hundreds of years before Rikyu. And the works like this are fired for many, many days, unlike glazed pieces, which are usually fired for about 30 hours. These are fired for many, many days. There's no glaze placed on it. And everything you see here, from the red color to the golden dripping on the side, all comes from the natural effects of the wood in the kiln. And Rikyu fell in love with this aesthetic, and then he had tea wares commissioned for the tea room. Works like this are still being made today, these large jars. Here's a contemporary piece. You'll notice that where my cursor is, that's the color of the clay. And the redness on here indicates that the piece was fairly deep into the kiln. It was fairly far from the fire. So the scorch marks are muted. But we see a lot of these tiny white specks. These are bits of feldspar pebbles which explode in the kiln during the firing process and come to the surface to give this wonderful texture. Now, if you place the piece a little closer to the fire, it gets darker like this. And you'll notice that this is very smooth. There are no pebbles. And you also notice that there are two white spots here, very, very interesting spots. That's achieved by placing a cracker-shaped piece of clay, very brittle, in two places, firing it, and that becomes a resist, so that when the firing is completed, that's removed, and you have this wonderful feature on the surface. Here's another piece that has the feldspar. And you notice the color is darker, it's closer to the fire. But notice in the front here, there's this very pale place, a very interesting feature, a focal point. That is achieved by placing in the kiln a pot or a jar right in front of that larger piece. And then when the fire is moving from the wood into the kiln, this piece will block the fire, the scorch marks. And then when it's removed, it looks like this. This piece was in the kiln, placed at the bottom of the kiln where wood ash tends to accumulate, and it encrusts upon the side of the piece, giving it this wonderful texture. Here again, we have the wood ash dripping down from the other side of this piece into riverlets, in becoming a kind of glass. You can see seashells where the piece was sitting on its side in the kiln to prevent it from attaching to getting stuck to the bottom of the kiln. This piece here has a very rich, creamy effect of the wood ash, the fly ash on the left side, and on the right side, this would be the ash which accumulates in the kiln. So it has two effects. Kutani ware, absolutely different aesthetic. It's made in the it's been made in the Kanazawa area for several hundred years, and they're known for their colors, the 5 colors of Kutani ware. It's indigo, yellow, green, dark reddish purple, and deep red. There's no red in this piece. But this would be traditional Kutani ware. And in the 21st century, Nakamura Takuo is making pieces with the same aesthetic base, but in a very contemporary expression. That said, the motif here has roots back to the Rinpa period about 300 years ago. Tokuda Yasukichi III became a living national treasure for bringing the art of overglaze enamel to the highest level in history. Create colors like this with this kind of vitality. What he was historic, and he became a living national treasure. And since then, he has inspired other artists in this form. When I say enamel, we're not talking about something you buy at Home Depot for $10, a chemical. Enamel in ceramics is glass which has been ground to the consistency of talcum powder and then mixed with a liquid and then painted onto the surface and fired so the glass melts at a low temperature in the kiln. Lacquerware is Japan's biggest kept secret. When we speak about lacquer, I gave tours for 30 years, and I think literally there were thousands of people who came through our company and our tours. I would say the number of people who understood Japanese lacquer could be counted on one hand. Lacquer in Japan is not something you buy in a can at a local hardware store. Lacquer is urushi. It is the finest, the most durable coating that exists in the natural or the modern world. One tree only produces 6 ounces of this magical fluid in its entire lifetime, and it's if you compare the price, 6 ounces at Home Depot cost about of a chemical lacquer costs about $3, and 6 ounces of urushi lacquer costs almost $100. Works like this are very common in Japanese restaurants and Japanese homes. I think we've all seen these works like this. The great Ogata Korin, one of the great painters and lacquer artists in history. So you see on here, you have the application of gold, you have mother of pearl, you have the application of metal to form this zigzag bridge in this piece, one of the most famous pieces of lacquer work, urushi work. And then today we have the work of Okada Yuji. This piece is done with dry lacquer, the kanshitsu. Kanshitsu is a process where there's no wood base. The shape is made from taking hemp cloth, soaking it in lacquer, layer upon layer, and then sculpting it into this shape. And you see below here, inlaid mother of pearl into the lacquer. You have gold applied to the surface, and you have these wonderful dragonfly wings applied in metal. Urushi here this would be the makie process, the gold on the vermilion. The vermilion would be representing about 8 to 10 different layers. It takes months to make a piece like this. Here is mother of pearl inlaid into the black lacquer and then covered with gold leaf. Here you'll see extremely thin pieces of seashell, which have been embedded into the black lacquer. Okada Yuji is only about 40 years old, and his work is in the Metropolitan of New York. One of our contest winners, the first Ronnie Prize winner, first prize of our contest several years ago, creates surfboards made from domestic wood and coating them with urushi lacquer. And this is a mother of pearl surfboard. Urushi surfboards, they surf better than conventional boards. They last longer. They're easier to repair. It's a piece with mother of pearl on the lid of this kogo. It's a box which holds the incense as it's taken into the room, into the tea room. Tanaka Nobuyuki is a very well-known urushi artist. This piece is about 1 meter wide. It's light as a feather. It's the dry lacquer method, and the gloss in here is so deep that it's equal to a mirror in its accuracy of reflection. Contemporary urushi ware often will show the grain of the wood. Work of Sasai Fumie. Ikeda Terumasa is a young man in his late 30s. He's really transported lacquerware into the 21st century. He's become a real phenomenon in Japan. He uses urushi, hinoki wood, mother of pearl, and gold leaf. He uses many of these contemporary universal symbols, Arabic numbers, random patterns, abstract forms, and into this colorful spectrum against the black background. Bamboo basketry is one of Japan's other great, powerful genres. So we see works like this were imported from China 500 years ago. This is a piece made by a Japanese in the Chinese style. The Chinese style would be very symmetrical. You'll see braiding. The piece itself is reminiscent of a ceramic or a bronze piece. So basketry became something, a cultural phenomenon in Japan, mostly from the 1700s on. It was important from China for the leaf tea ceremony, which is very different from the powder tea ceremony. It's much more of a Chinese influence. And so many Japanese would make fake Chinese baskets during the 1700s and 1800s because they were so expensive to import that they were able to sell the fake baskets. And then eventually the fakes were as good or even better than the originals. And by the modern era, Japanese began to sign their names to their baskets and sell them as Japanese made. So we get into the 20th century, we see the emergence of the Japanese style, wamono, as opposed to the Chinese style. So here's a very strong folk influence. There's this wonderful asymmetry, the bulkiness, the using of the bamboo root for the handle. The work of the great Izukaru Kansai, one of the greatest artists of the 20th century in Japan. This is one of his earlier works, and then he began to evolve into this wonderful asymmetrical piece. And then by the 1950s, he was doing very mid-century-like pieces like this. Honda Shoryu was one of the many artists who brought basketry into the 21st century, as did the late Tori Ippo. It's a very complex piece. His works were inspired by the sea, the waves in the sea. Very, very complicated. It took him 3 months to make one piece, 2 months just to figure out how he was going to make it, and a month to make the materials and put it together. Most of the artists who are producing these works have to reinvent themselves every time they make a new basket or a new bamboo piece. The work of Shono Tokuzo, second generation master from Beppu. Ueno Masao's work, it's very, very fine. And he adds a gold leaf to as this accent of the gold leaf, which is unusual. Chikunsai the fourth is probably the most famous current artist in Japan working in bamboo, and he made this piece designed by Kaijima Sawako, who was one of the judges for our Japan Craft 21 contest. Many of you are familiar with Chikunsai. He makes these very powerful installations in museums and buildings, lobbies of buildings all over the world. Barrels are something that are ubiquitous in the Japanese culture. We see barrels like this everywhere. When I first came to Japan 50 years ago, every house had various barrels. We see these in Japanese restaurants, of course, to this day. And now contemporary barrel makers are infusing their work with contemporary design. So this is a wine cooler. Stools. This is made like a barrel. Everything is connected with those two copper bands. Otherwise, you remove the bands and it falls apart. Nakagawa has produced an amazing thing. This is a barrel room. It's 9 feet wide. It holds 5 or 6 people. It can be assembled in 90 minutes. It's made of hinoki cypress, and it's brilliant. It can be inside, outside, for exhibition use, for permanent or temporary use. Glass is something that normally we don't think of as a traditional Japanese craft, yet it was produced from the beginning of the Edo period. And later in the Edo period, this European style cut glass, Edo Kiriko. But today, the glass artists in Japan are really turning heads. They're really able to infuse their work with such a unique and such a recognizable Japanese sensibility. This is the technique is the pate verre technique, where you create a form in a mold, and then you take ground glass powder and you affix it to the molded piece, and you fire it, and it melts into this beautiful surface. In the 1980s, we see the emergence of the furniture designed by Kuramata Shiro, one of the most famous designers of the 20th century. And he worked with the Mihoya Glass Company to create these furniture pieces. Probably very few, if anyone, can make this except for Mihoya. They're geniuses, and this is an iconic collection. Metal has been around in Japan for millennia. It's the Bronze Age was 2,300 years ago. And for the past 400 years, we see many works like this for the tea ceremony. These kettles, these kama kettles, are beautifully wrought. Excuse me, they are formed in molds, actually, and the variety is almost infinite. There's so many. There are scores and scores and scores of styles, shapes. And then now in the 21st century, we see people like Osumi Yukie, who is a living national treasure. She is doing amazing work. This is hammered. Starts with a flat piece of silver, just a flat piece, and she hammers into the shape. Then she takes a textile imprint and she inlays it into the piece, and then she chisels it and polishes it to reveal the inlaid pattern. Iwata, in this piece, this is a copper piece with gold inlay. Here we have many kinds of metal which are fused together. Here's a piece uses copper oxide to get that brilliant color and the enamel. This would be silver plating and oxidizing tin. This would be copper with an enamel coating. Weaving, another of Japan's strongest suits. Works like this came with this type of motif. This type of motif came from the central and western parts of Asia, which is now the part of China. It came on the Silk Road in the 500s and 700s to Japan. And Tatsumura, the scion of the great Tatsumura Weaving Company, 120 years ago, went to the Japanese Museum of Antiquities, the Sosho-in, and he found little scraps of these bits of cloth, and he studied them and studied them and studied them, and he actually recreated the looms that wove these pieces. And it's called the Nara tall loom. And no, the loom hasn't been seen in 1,000 years, and they were able to recreate it. And consequently, Tatsumura has been able to reintroduce into the Japanese culture all of those amazing motifs that came on the Silk Road 1,300 years ago, 1,400 years ago. Now, the grandson of Tatsumura is the late Koho Tatsumura. He wanted to save the great rarefied weaving of Kyoto. So he founded a nonprofit, and he designed I believe he tried to design the most difficult to weave pieces that could possibly be woven in order to keep the master weavers, give them work to do that would challenge them to keep the techniques alive. This is a woven piece. This piece was commissioned by the royal family of Japan. In order to preserve the techniques, they went through the nonprofit, and they commissioned this piece in honor of the current emperor, who was then the crown prince. And there are 100 colors in here. It looks three-dimensional. It's really an amazing piece. Monsha is a kind of weaving. This is Tsuchiya is a living national treasure. The yarn is dyed first and then set up on the loom. And it's a translucent, very airy type of weave, gauze type weave. Karaori is one of the great treasures of the Japanese culture. It's been around for about 1,000 years. This is through history, they've used karaori as the technique for no costumes or for bridal uchikake coats. This is not embroidery. This is three-dimensional weaving. So these processes look like they're embroidered, but they're actually done on a loom, a very complicated loom. Hikihaku is a process where you take gold, silver, or platinum leaf, and you place it in patterns on washi paper, and you cut it 1/64 of an inch thick, and you weave it into silk to create the luxurious obi of Kyoto. And this is what you're seeing here. This is 50% paper, 50% silk. And the design on here was inspired by the person who made that lacquer box, which I spoke about earlier, Ogata Koni. So wherever there's weaving, there will be dyeing, and Japan is masterful in their dyeing technique. So this would be a traditional Yuzen style. Yuzen's been around for about 400 years, and it's created by using a tube which similar to a confectioner's tube, when you put a paste resist in it and you squeeze out a very fine line. You can see where my cursor is. You can see a white line there. So this is first, it's laid out with that confectioner's tube. Then the colors are brushed in with tiny brushes, and you'll notice that every leaf, every flower, every petal, it's a gradation of color. So it's an incredible amount of work. There are many people, probably 15 to 20 people, who will collaborate to make one piece, 15 to 20 different processes. So the piece may be shuttled from place to place, from workshop to workshop. Here's a contemporary stencil dyer. You notice how irregular the dots are. Now, if you have polka dots in a row, it may be very nice, but it doesn't have the movement and vitality that this piece has. It's purposely, it's all handmade. The stencils are handmade. I asked one of our winners, our contest winners, who is a stencil dyer, why he prefers handmade stencils when you can do it with a laser. And he says that the laser pieces are perfect, but the hand-done pieces have a vitality that the machine cannot replicate. Gradation dyeing with small brushes. This is stencil dyeing plus a blur dye. The two stripes are a kind of blur dyeing, bokashi. This piece was first dyed with a stencil, and you could see where my cursor is. You could see these waves in tiny dots. And then afterwards, it was sent to another dyer who did the gradation blur dyeing from charcoal to gray to this white, which comes from oyster shell. This is a pattern which is dyed and removed, dyed and removed, dyed and removed to create a very rich and blurred effect. The application of leaf to silk. Blur dyeing, bokashi. Again, that irregularness gives it so much vitality. On the left, you'll see this black and white piece. This is a form of marbling using sumi ink in water with a binder. So they have a trough which is 40 feet long, and they dip the silk into the trough very quickly. It's a very difficult process. And then dye the parts in between in oyster shell. So here are some variations on that dyeing technique. About 12 years ago, we introduced Saito Hiroshi to Portland, and he is a contemporary Yuzen dyer. He's trained as a classic kimono dyer, but he uses wax resist, and he created an amazing exhibition in Portland. Many of you, I think, saw it. It was very popular. I think he sold everything he brought. This was Diane Durston arranged this. I have a couple of his shirts, and I've had them for many years. And to this day, wherever I go, people ask me where I got the shirt. Indigo's been in Japan for 1400 years. Probably the most sustainable, the most color fast dye that exists, all natural. Here we have yarn, which is bundled and then dyed in these patterns, and then woven together in two dimensions, two directions to form kasuri. And there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different kasuri patterns in Japan. Another artist who Diane Durston brought to Portland is Fukumoto Shihoko. She is the reigning master of indigo art, and she is famous for her gradation of color, her blurring effect. This is dyed 40 times. It's cotton. This is tie-dye, and it's extremely complex. And each dot has a gradation of color in it. This would be a gauze silk woven by, dyed by Fukumoto-san. It's a no theater costume. And here are two hemp tea rooms, which she made, and they're both in permanent collections in museums in the US. One, I think, is in the Museum of Art and Design in New York, Columbus Circle. Washi, of course, we all know, Japanese paper. It's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of styles, varieties, thicknesses, textures, patterns made all over Japan. Here we have a typical Fusuma doors, and then we have the work of a contemporary washi artist. This one is Sarah Breyer. She's lived in Japan for her entire adult life, and her form is washi, and she dyes the fibers and she immerses it into this vat of water, and through a very controlled process creates these wonderful designs. Horiki Eriko is probably the world's leading washi artist. Everyone said she could not create pieces larger than a Fusuma door, and she broke everyone's illusions, and she makes huge pieces that are in architectural settings all over the world. And all it is she has, mostly it's just mulberry bark bound together with a natural root. Figurative craft, we're all familiar with this type of Japanese doll, but very few people are aware that that this has expanded in the 21st century, 20th and 21st centuries, into this very, very detailed figurative art. Look at the fingers, the facial expressions these are made from powdered wood, which has been molded. Statuary. I'm giving myself a little bit of license here. I'm starting with the statuary of Egypt. So this is 4,000 years ago, but these statues inspired the Greeks 2,300 years ago, who in turn inspired the Romans 2,100 years ago, who then inspired the Gandharans of Pakistan and Pakistan area. And they inspired the Indians 1,700 years ago, who inspired the Chinese, who inspired the Japanese 1,400 years ago. And the Japanese took this and they ran with it. And by the 1200s, Japan was the world center of Buddhist art. It was the golden age. So you see how this is developing from the 8, 9, 10, 1100s, making statues out of wood. And by the 1200s, they were no longer carving out of one solid piece, but they were binding many pieces of wood together and carving, making lightweight statues that did not split. Then we come into the Kamakura period, the true golden age of realism. Contemporary piece where the grain is showing. So lastly, we have stoneworks, which we see in Japanese gardens everywhere. We have stone lanterns. And then we have contemporary pieces by people such as Izumi Masatoshi, who was the partner with Isamu Noguchi for 25 years. He was the cutting skill behind Noguchi. And then the great Yasuda Kan, whose works are gracing corporate centers and all over the world, white statuary stone. Those of you who've been to Benesse House in Naoshima will recognize this piece. And this piece, Yasuda-san has taken this piece and he made it into an upright piece. And this became our first prize trophy. Yasuda-san donates it to us every year for the Japanese, for our Japanese craft revitalization contest. So I invite you to join us in some way, to be a part of craft revitalization. We have opportunities for volunteers. We have, if you would like to make a donation to Save the Crafts of Japan, you can go to our website, just click on donate, and there are easy ways to do this and get a tax deduction in the process. So I'm handing this back to Aki. I apologize, I went 2 minutes over. I think you're muted.
Yeah, I did it again. Sorry. Well, thank you so much again, Steve, for your tour de force of presentation. I mean, you never cease to amaze us, actually, the way you walk us through some of the most recognizable, facets of Japanese craftsmanship, but you just do it so organically without any script. It just shows how, you have the first-hand experience, basically, having visited all these different places and meeting with all these craftspeople. Your personal connection and intimacy, of knowledge actually about these craftsmanship and craftspeople really came through in your presentation. So thank you so much for putting color and texture to our knowledge. So yeah, with that, I'd like to, get the Q&A session going, actually, if I may. And hold on, looking into some of the questions. Yeah, I would, in the meantime, I would definitely invite the others, other people in the audience, virtual audience, to post their questions within the Q&A box at the very bottom of the screen that you might see. Right, okay, interesting. So I have the first question for you, Steve. Says, what craft do you think is in the biggest danger, the most danger among the ones that you talked about today?
What comes to my mind would be urushi lacquer. First of all, it's not known by people. People just don't know about lacquer, urushi, and sales have dropped by 80% in the last 25 years. So this is probably the most endangered, and we have several members in our organization who are actively working with urushi. But it's education is an important part. When someone sees a piece of work that's this big and it's cost $2,000, once they understand what went into that, months and months and months of work, then they understand. So it's education. I think people are willing to spend if they understand.
That is really critical, isn't it? To, I guess, validate certain types of crafts, design items. Once you understand what goes into it, in the creation of these different pieces, then you can definitely connect the dots, I suppose. And
Yes.
then it does justify the price tags that they may come with. So yeah, I think those are really, really valid points, actually.
And this is what I'm hoping to to point out in the upcoming presentation in December on ceramics. You know, ceramics, I gave it just a tiny bit today, but it's important, I think, not just to see pretty pictures, but to know how they're made. You know, when people look at colorful porcelain, most people think that someone just took a pot, just painted it with oil paints or something. They don't know that it could be up to fired five separate times for 24, 30 hours each time. And it's so anyway, during the December presentation, I'm going to go into some of the details of why it's so spectacular, so people have more of an understanding to develop their appreciation even deeper.
Excellent. Yeah, so a couple of the questions I'm seeing right now, they do relate to pertain to Japanese ceramic art, as well as the application of some of the ceramic art, by people like Sen no Rikyu. So I might just reserve them for the next iteration, where you be having more focused discussion about Japanese ceramic art in general, right?
Yes.
So I'm gonna quickly go to glass related question, if I may. Yeah, so this person says, I didn't know much about Japanese glass. How long have they been making these glass art? Where in Japan did it start? Yeah, so two questions in one.
Are we referring to the contemporary glass art?
I suppose this person is asking about kind of genesis of Japanese glass art. So perhaps history behind Japanese glass art in general.
Yes, well, there's an interesting development which occurred post-war. As prior to the war, most craftspeople in most genres were training as apprentices with masters, and it was a very male-dominated world. And after the war, the university systems really expanded, and they began to have glass, ceramics, textile departments in these universities. And this is where women have really come forward. So you'll notice that many of the glass artists are women. Many of the really profoundly successful ones are women. Toyama is a kind of center for modern glass art. So I would say post-war, I mean, it's definitely 20th century, but it really took off after the war. So before you see cut glass, the traditional European style cut glass, of course, but
okay, more questions pouring into the Q&A box actually. So yeah, very quickly moving on to the next one, coming from Hilary Russell. What is the proportion of women to men among these artisans in general?
Well, gee, I'd say in ceramics, each genre is different. Ceramics was almost entirely men before the war, and again through the university system, many of the really prominent artists are coming forward are women recently. So I would say it's like a curve going up like this. It's not like this yet, but women have really come forward in a big way. There was a traveling show in the States about 15 years ago of some top female artists, ceramists in Japan. There were about a dozen of them, that traveling show, and that really brought them to the world's attention. I'd say that it's women are increasing, but it's hard to give a number. It's hard to give a percentage, because it's how do you define how you go by a person's success or just by sheer numbers of people participating. It's very difficult to put a number.
Yeah, hopefully this answer does answer some part of what Karen Brown was asking about, what are craftswomen in the very early crafts. But yeah, it's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly how many people, how prevalent women, craftswomen were. But quickly moving down to
One
well,
thing besides the women who are coming out of universities, more
mhm,
and more women are training with traditional Japanese men in the in the kobo setting, the workshop
mhm.
setting. So that is increasing. It's not as nearly as unusual nowadays to see a woman training with an artist, an artisan.
Excellent. Excellent. That actually provides me with a perfect segue to the next question I was going to go to. Diane asks, since many of these crafts require years of apprenticeship, how do you attract and encourage younger people to these different crafts?
Uh, well, that's a big question. I mean, if that's this is something that we wrestle with all the time, and
Mm-hmm.
it seems that we have to guarantee that there will be a market for the things they're making.
Mm-hmm.
And if something like urushi, which is declining in sales, uh,
Mm-hmm.
it's difficult to attract people because the future seems kind of bleak. So the artists who we saw today, they are artists, crafts, master artists. So they have galleries behind them. But when we speak about people who are making everyday beautiful things that we have in our homes, those to attract apprentices for those that level is challenging. But we have started an apprentice program. We have started the first, I believe it's the first employment bulletin for people looking for craft positions and people looking for apprentices or staff. And we're sending this nationwide. So it's there's no place where a craftsperson can go now, a central place to advertise that they need someone. And so we created that. That's one of the ways we hope to contribute.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Judith is actually asking, yeah, if possible for you to identify this Urushi artist, supposed to be a living national treasure. Um, she says it was about 4 or 5 years ago. He was creating a box to gift to the Hagi temple celebration. He used a rainbow beetle shell to decorate his work. Do you recognize this kind of work? Is he still
Well,
alive? Do you happen to know this?
Urose-san is the living national treasure in Urushi now. Urose-san.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it he would be I think I don't think there are more than one Urushi.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, there's also a national, oh, sorry, official list of those craftsmen designated as Japan's national living national treasure, given by different category as well. So, yeah, Judith, I think you might be able to look it up online as well, just to be sure. I think we have just one, time for one more question then if we are, okay with time, just going over by a few minutes. But what are the main reasons behind the sharp drop in the number of craftsmen since 1979? How the Japanese government or school reacted to that to, I guess, alleviate that negative trend? Can you kind of walk us through some of the factors there?
Yeah, it's very, very complex. There's no
Mm-hmm.
there's no simple answer, but you have major aspects of the Japanese culture which are changing. For example,
Mm-hmm.
in up until the 1970s, heads of companies, of very wealthy merchants, they all studied tea. They had tea houses, and they were patrons of works for tea, all the different implements. And that has pretty much gone away. Golf
Mm-hmm.
came to Japan in the 70s, and the patronage system pretty much maybe 90% left. Another thing is Buddhism. Buddhism was a major customer for
Mm-hmm.
craftsmanship. And nowadays, and Buddhism depends on its income for funerals. That's where and now they have corporate funerals where you can go have something very quickly done and it's very easy. and it's inexpensive. And so everyone is going to the corporate funerals. So the Buddhist establishment doesn't have the wherewithal to motivate people to produce crafts anymore as much as they did. It's a big problem. Another thing would be all these people, like many craftsmen have great talent, but they cannot compete with Louis Vuitton, with all the great houses of Europe, who have great budgets for advertising. You have carpenters cannot compete with these large corporate construction companies that could come in and do very, very simple construction work very cheaply, practically overnight. So it's so the idea of craftsmanship is not being focused upon, even though when you have a corporate building, it doesn't have craftsmanship within it. People don't have the other side of the story being advertised to them. So it's a very complex story. It's one after another. They've been hit so many different ways, and it all happened at once.
Yeah, multiple factors, I guess. Yeah, it's never simple, is it? That's what makes your mission all the more important, I suppose, to kind of address this issue from multiple angles, not just one, but yeah, you are having to kind of create a community of supporters right now.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, well, being mindful of everyone's time, obviously, we are coming to the end of the program now. But Steve, this was yet another amazing presentation covering such a great variety of different art forms from Japan and how they are being fostered as well. So I certainly learned a lot from this presentation as well. Well, the next and the final edition, actually, of this webinar is slated for December 6th. I want to just remind everyone. And we'll be exploring the world of Japanese ceramics in much greater depth as we talked about. And here, Steve, would you like to give everyone your final thoughts before we end this program?
Sure. This is, I always call Japan the world's best kept secret. And I think that's reflected in the title of the series. There's so much to learn here. I think we've just gotten started. So I invite you to really take advantage of this. I have basically 50 years of being in the trenches here. And so what I've done is I've boiled down 50 years of experience into 1-hour segments. So it's I think it's an opportunity to really learn from all my trial and error.
Well, thanks so much for sharing with us your expertise and wisdom that you have accumulated over the past half century in Kyoto. And, there's also so much to look forward to in your next presentation as well. Last but not least, please do consider filling out the survey right after this program to share your thoughts and feedback so we can keep making these programs better for you and our community here. So with that, till next time, take care and thank you so very much for sharing your time with us. Thank you, Steve, as well, and everyone at Japan Crafts 21 in Japan, making this all possible. And I also want to, give a quick shout out to my own staff members back in Portland, just working on all the details behind the scenes. So thank you so very much for everyone. And thank you for tuning in this time to share, your precious time with us. Thank you so much. Next time, see you.